How does retirement spending compare for a single person versus a couple with $1 million saved? Unfortunately, singles are at a major tax disadvantage, which often means paying more taxes and keeping less of their savings. But how much of a difference does it really make? In this video, I'll break down what you'd be able to spend in retirement as a single versus couple with $1 million saved. And then I'll share some tips to help singles make the most of their savings and minimize their tax bill. And keep in mind, the tips I share in this video will help you save more regardless of your asset level. So let's dive in. So right off the top, let's talk about three major disadvantages that a single person has entering retirement versus a couple or common law person. The very first one is you only have one set of government benefits. Your CPP, or Canadian Pension Plan, and OAS, Old Age Security, are two fundamental income sources for most retiring Canadians. And if you're single, obviously you only have one CPP and one old age security. Now, you may have a survivor pension if you were previously married and lost a spouse. There are some options there, but for most of you single walking into retirement, you have two government pensions. Those two government pensions will vary on how much you get depending on how much you put in, how long you've been in Canada, etc. But as an example, let's say in total you're collecting $1,200 between the two of them. Well, if you're married or common law, you're doubling that right off the bat potentially, or even more. And so right off the bat, having one government pension only is a huge disadvantage as a single person. The second massive disadvantage is no income splitting, right? If you have one high income earner and one lower income earner, you can split that income and lower your overall tax bill. As a single person, there's no one to split it with. And I think this is where the government of Canada needs to look at making some changes, because it is a massive disadvantage. And if you're watching this video as a single, you understand that I'm paying more tax with less income than my neighbor couple. That doesn't seem right or fair, and it's really not. And so there needs to be a bit of a change here, but definitely having no income splitting is a massive disadvantage being single going into retirement. The third big disadvantage is just timing, right? The more assets you have, the more kind of movement you can do, the more tax planning. I see this day in, day out, and you may not fully grasp this, but I'll jump into our software here in a minute and show you how this all works. But not having the ability to I'm going to put my income on hold, start this one, create some flexibility, some tax planning. The more options you have there, i.e. the more people you have there, the more flexibility you have, and generally the less amount of tax you pay. So again, that's a huge disadvantage as well. Now remember, I'm pointing out three massive disadvantages here. I'm going to give some tips later in this video. But like I've said before in other videos, entering retirement as a single person in the tax structure we're in here in Canada, and for most countries, you're at a bit of a disadvantage. But how do you take things to your advantage as best you can? We'll cover that later and throughout this video. So let's first look at a couple, again, $1 million saved. We have John and Andrea YouTube. They are both 60 years old. We have life expectancy to age 90 for them. And if I go down to assets, again, 400,000 in RSP for John, 100 in TFSAs. And the same thing for Andrea. So just to keep it as simple as possible, obviously, typically entering retirement, it may not be a perfect match. But again, with income splitting and structure, there's a lot of flexibility there. So what I want to do is look at a few things here. This is what we call a max spend, meaning what is the couple able to spend based on that $1 million if they were to live from 60 to 90 and spend every single dollar they've saved and create some tax efficiency. Again, you can see if I go into John here, you can see in his RSP, I've done an RSP meltdown here. So that account is depleted by about early 80s, 83 years old for him. And so, we're keeping that TFSA. We have some tax planning here. And again, something we always look at. And if you have a retirement plan, this is one you want to look at as well, which is your average or your effective tax rate. Is your average tax rate through retirement, or at least through the tax planning years, typically early to mid 80s, is your average tax rate really level, like within 2 to 3%? And we can see here for John and for Andrea here, I'll show you as well, it's right in that range. In fact, it's within about 1% throughout retirement. Andrea, not only is she within 1% as well, but within the same range. So within that kind of 8 to 9%. Now, if we look at John and Andrea here, you can see, so again, married couple, $1 million savings in retirement between RSP and TFSA. Government benefits I have at 80, so CPP at 85%, 100% on old age security. You can see here they can collect just over $80,000 after tax, adjusted to inflation, for the rest of their life. And that goes all the way to age 90. I've not laddered the income here in this scenario. It's just what is the maximum amount they can spend. Now let's jump into an individual. Same scenario here. $1 million saved, 800,000 RSP, 200,000 in TFSA, but again, one person, not two. The government benefits are the exact same at 85% and 100 on the old age security. But again, there's only one of these government benefits. I've done the full tax planning here, same kind of RSP meltdown, leveling out the tax bill. You can see that effective tax rates within about 2% throughout. And you can see the max spend is very, very different here, $58,246. So over $20,000 after tax adjusted to inflation on an ongoing basis. So a massive difference there. And you can see here, total tax bill is, let's just look for the first 5 years here, about just under $10,000 per year. If we look at John and Andrea, again, couple, collecting $80,000, so much more income, you can see the total tax bill is under $6,000 a year. So as a couple, not only are they collecting over $20,000 more after tax in their pocket adjusted to inflation, but their tax amount is substantially low combined. Under $6,000 as a household versus $9,000 to $10,000 as an individual, which with much less tax. So again, that's a massive, massive difference. And so again, I'll cover some tips later in this video on how to massage this a little bit. Obviously, there's tax rules in place and we can't skirt the tax rules. So how do we massage this as best as we can? So in this scenario for John, single individual, again, he's spending down all his money. He's got $358 left in his TFSA at age 90, and he's collected $58,246 per year. Now, what if we looked at the couple, John and Andrea, spending that same amount? How much would they have left at the end of the day? So here you have John and Andrea, that same spend, $58,246. And if we go down, you'll see they have $2.1 million left in their accounts, all in the TFSA, so it can all be passed on tax-free. So that's the difference. So that's a massive difference, and that's where this discrepancy in taxes and structure and planning really needs to change here in Canada. And I'm not sure when this will change, but definitely a large percentage of retirees in Canada are single. It's a large basket of people entering retirement. And so they're at this massive disadvantage. And so, we hear of people getting married as they enter retirement just for the tax planning purposes. Now, I don't necessarily recommend that. There's obviously a lot of issues with that too. But paying a lot more tax and having a lot less income doesn't seem like a fair solution to this. And so what is some of the solution? So when it comes to singles in retirement, you don't need half the amount. You typically need around 70% of what a couple needs. That's statistics out there. There's been a lot of research. And I would say that's what we see with our clients, about 70 to 75% of what a couple would need with the same lifestyles, living in the same area, that kind of thing. So keep that in mind. It's not half, it's about 70, 75%. Now, tip number one for you is, as a single person entering retirement, you really need to focus in on your Canadian pension plan and the timing on when you take your CPP. When you're a couple, you have a bit more flexibility. If one of you makes a mistake, takes it at the wrong time, you have the other person kind of offset it and kind of meet in the middle. But as a single person, the timing around your Canadian pension plan and when to take it can make a drastic difference on how you live through retirement, how much money you have, and how much security you have later in life. Again, remember, there's no one there to take care of you later in life. You need to make sure you take care of yourself. What you don't want to fall into is fearing what you're gonna have unfold down the road because you don't know what it looks like. You hold your money way too close to your chest early in retirement, and you actually don't enjoy your retirement. And that's a lot of you watching this video as a single person. You're not sure what the future holds. You only have yourself to look after, but you have to take care of yourself. You have to make sure that you don't run out of money. Well, one way to do that is to actually delay or defer your Canadian pension plan all the way up to 70. Might be somewhere between 65 and 70, but the longer you delay it, the more that amount will be. Now, again, if you're worried about market risk, inflation, longevity, these are things that the Canadian pension plan will protect against. So if these are your concerns, which I would say for 99% of people, those are concerns that they have. You should be delaying your Canadian pension plan as long as you're able to. And that gives you more money, right? We all want that defined benefit pension plan. Well, that's what the Canadian pension plan is. It's a guaranteed income that adjusts to inflation that will pay you over time. And the more we can defer that, the larger it's going to be, and we collect more money later in life, right? That's that security blanket that we're looking for, especially as a single person. So tip number one is to really know when the best time for you to take your Canadian pension plan to give you the most amount of money, obviously, but give you that security, that that you need when you build your retirement plan and start working out and living through your retirement. Tip number 2 comes around your TFSA, and I'm going to jump back into the software here in a second and show you both of these tips and how they play out in this scenario that I just showed you. But having flexibility in your tax-free savings account is uber important. And because if you have that emergency, any extra money that you pull out of a registered account goes as a marginal tax rate, meaning that you're going to pay a lot of tax if your hot water tank goes, or you need a new roof, or anything comes up where it's $5, $10, $20, $30,000 lump sum extra out of your RSP. So if you fall into that, again, that's all tax in your hands. You can't split that with your spouse or partner. That's all on you. And that's why it's really important to make sure you build up a TFSA as you build up towards retirement, but also make sure that that keeps funded through retirement. So how do you do that? Like, how do you make sure you protect your CPP, protect your TFSA, create tax efficiency? I'll show you in the software. So jumping back in here, as a reminder, single person, this is Canadian pension plan at age 70, old age security at age 65, 58,246. And you can see the RSP meltdown. Again, we've leveled out that effective or average tax rate. Again, everyone's meltdown is going to look a little bit different. How much you have, how much other assets you have, how much income you need. There's a lot of variables here. So for John, we melted it down in a way to keep his average tax rate around 15% plus or minus about 1.5%. So very nice and level. Now you can see here on his TFSA, we're taking a little bit out for the first about 6 years or so. Then we're putting a little bit in, taking a little bit out. Again, we call this the lever account. If you need a little bit more, that's where you pull it out of. If you don't need as much, that's where you put it into. If John has a year where he only spends $55,000 and not $58,000, he'll either take less out of his TFSA or actually top up his TFSA a little bit. The RRSP, or the RIF in this case, that plan would stay the same throughout. So the TFSA for John and for most of you is your lever account. Money in, money out, that flex account if you need a little bit more, or don't spend all your budget that you had allocated. So, but you can see he has a well-funded TFSA right through retirement. Even into his late 80s, he still has a few $100,000 in there, which creates that flexibility. Now I want to show you what happens if John had taken his CPP at 60. And that's where a lot of you fall into. You retire and you were like, I need to take all the money, like I've saved up this nest egg. For John, it was $1 million, which is a very nice nest egg, but he doesn't want to deplete it. So, okay, I'll take my government benefits and like kind of get money from there, and then I'll start my old age security at 65 and not touch my money. Try and keep my money for later. But here's what happens if you do that. So here's a very typical client that we see walk into our office before we start doing planning. 60-year-old individual, $1 million saved, which is great. I mean, that's a very large account saved by age 60 for an individual person. So maybe you have less. But again, like I said earlier, the planning tips that I'm talking about today, whether you have 50,000 or 50 million, these principles work as a single entry in retirement. So you can see his CPP has started at age 60. He's collecting less, obviously, because he's taken it earlier. OAS still at 65, earliest you can take it. And then he's taking the minimum amount out of his RSP or RIF at this point, and then complementing it with the TFSA. And if you look at it, you think, well, for the first 5 years, I'm paying no tax. Like, this is fantastic. And then the tax ramps up from there. The other part of it is, if you look at his TFSA, it's depleted over the first 5 years. So yeah, you're not paying tax, but now you have no flexibility. So you have less money overall, you have less flexibility in your TFSA, and you've created a bit of a tax issue with your RIF account. But you can see if we max out his income from age 60 to age 90, he's now only collecting $54,349. Substantially less, like $4,000 after tax adjusted to inflation every year, less than had he deferred his CPP all the way to 70. Now you might say, yeah, but Adam, I would have done the RSP meltdown. I'd take my CPP at 60, RSP meltdown. Well, that's what we're looking at here. And it solves one problem, but really doesn't solve the other, which is maximizing your income. So here you can see we've done the same RSP meltdown, leveled it out over time, created some TFSA flexibility. Again, much better on the TFSA side, but you can see his income is still only $55,000, $3,000 less. And for anyone entering retirement, especially single, like you want to maximize that income. $3,000 after tax is a trip every year. It's flexibility. It's a no-brainer to delay that CPP. And again, a lot of you aren't doing this task, which is running through, what does CPP look at? 60, 65, 70. When is the best time for me to take it based on my goals, the assets I have, the income needs I have, the retirement, everything. It needs to come together. And a lot of you are panicking, you're taking your government benefits early, and you're not doing a proper RSP meltdown, burning down TFSA. Again, you're losing that flexibility. You're not looking at the proper CPP timing, old age security timing. All this stuff has to come together. So my 2 tips for you as you enter retirement as a single: meet with a certified financial planner, someone that understands deep tax planning when it comes to retirement, the decumulation. If you need help with that, reach out to our office. We'd love to help you. parallelwealth.com/planning. You can learn more about our services. But what you need is, what does CPP look like if I take it at 60, 65, 70, somewhere in between? Like, how does this land for me? The second thing is, once the plan is built out, how does my TFSA look? Like, is my RSP or my RIF kind of drawn out by early to mid 80s? That's important. But do I have that flexibility that I need as a single person looking after myself, right? That's really important. So make sure you have a funded TFSA throughout your retirement to create that flexibility. If you can focus on those 2 things, you're going to put more money back in your pocket, you're going to pay less tax, but you're going to have a lot more freedom in your plan. You're not going to be relying on your money as much. I'd rather rely on a guaranteed pension, CPP, versus my money invested in these crazy markets, right? The quicker I can deplete my assets and rely on a government pension, I'll do that all day long. But many of you are not choosing that option. And for those of you looking for a deeper dive on an individual retirement plan, we'll be doing that in our very next video. So make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and we'll have that out here in a few days. So stay tuned for that.